We begin tonight in Abuja, where President Bola Tinubu has formally sworn in Professor Joash Amupitan, a senior advocate of Nigeria, as the new chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. The swearing-in ceremony took place at the presidential villa in Abuja during a meeting of the National Economic Council attended by Vice President Kashim Shettima, state governors and other council members. Professor Amupitan's appointment, announced earlier this month, follows the completion of Professor Mahmood Yakubu's tenure. His nomination received approval from the National Council of State and was confirmed by the Senate after a screening held last Thursday.
Let me first begin by congratulating Professor Joash Amupitan on the appointment as the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission. Your nomination for the important role and the subsequent confirmation by the Senate is a testament to your capacity and the confidence reposed in you by both the executive and the legislative arm of government. The significant achievement marked the beginning of a challenging yet rewarding journey, and I trust that you will approach your responsibilities with the highest level of integrity, dedication, and patriotism.
I'm now joined by a political scientist and former member, National Electoral Commission, Professor Adele Jinadu. It's a pleasure to have you with us here tonight, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening. It's nice to meet you.
Yes, indeed, sir. Prof, Nigeria's new INEC chairman, Professor Joash Amupitan, well, he's declared that election integrity is not negotiable. Yet after several election cycles, issues like logistic failures, compromised collation processes, and even enforcement of rules, well, that still persists. So from your observation, what do you see as the top 3 weakest links in INEC today? And realistically, how soon could each of those be fixed under this new leadership?
Well, let me begin by congratulating Professor Amupitan on his appointment. I'm sure he's aware that it's a very, very onerous responsibility that he's going to shoulder. And I join all other well-wishers to wish him a successful tenure as chairman of INEC. Well, I think the first important consideration for me is that the position is a very awful one. Awful in the sense that it is something that is not within the total control of the chairman and other members of the Electoral Commission. And it is not in their total control because the electoral process consists of 3 major components, within which INEC only plays some prominent part in one of them, and very, very marginal role in the other 2. The first one is, of course, that there is the task of rulemaking, and the rulemaking with regard to the electoral process lies with the National Assembly and lies with the National Assembly. Of course, some stakeholders, including INEC, have a say in that process of rulemaking. But the process essentially is one that is under the control of the National Assembly. And I include in the National Assembly, in this case, the executive branch, because the executive branch, actually, the president is the chief legislator in any federal system, because it is his bills that are passed into law, and he makes recommendations to the National Assembly on certain critical appointments which only need the confirmation. But the task of rulemaking essentially lies with the National Assembly and the executive branch, the president, because the president has to sign off to the electoral law. If he doesn't sign off to the electoral law, it doesn't become law until it is overridden, is veto is overridden by the. So the INEC has very little role to play other than a consultative one and sometimes a recommendatory, advisory one in terms of law making or rule making for the electoral process. I think we need to get that straight. The second one is, of course, rule application. And INEC has, again, an important role to play in rule application. But it's not the only agency that has a role to play in rule application. It's a very complex process. But INEC, of course, has a part to play in rule application. The third one is, of course, electoral dispute adjudication, where it has very little role to play. So you see now, if you look at that three-dimensional aspect of the electoral process, you see that the role that INEC has, although a very, very important one, is essentially with rule application. And even with rule application, it is not exactly totally in its control. So that's the first point I want to make, that we need to get clear.
Okay then, Professor. Rule making, rule application, electoral adjudication, that's what INEC faces currently, or has always. But let's take a look at Professor Amupitan's background. He comes from a strong academic background. Sir, go ahead.
No, go. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, rule making lies with the National Assembly. They pass the law.
Okay.
INEC can have an input into it, can make recommendation, but it is the National Assembly that until and unless they pass an electoral law, it does not become operative. And the executive also has a role to play, because unless the president assents to the electoral
so INEC plays a small role. So INEC plays a small role.
In terms of rule making, yeah.
All right, sir.
Yeah,
but Professor,
especially one about advisory and consultative. Yeah.
Okay then. So I wanted to move on and talk about Amupitan's academic background. He's got a very strong one. Professor of law with decades since 1980s, legal education and governance research. But INEC's problems often stem from field-level operations like we've seen. Missing materials, poor training, ad hoc staff, gaps in result management. How can a scholar like him translate legal and governance theories into real operational reforms? Now is the big question.
You know, when you go through academic training, it's not just book. It's just you're not just a book. There's also a culture to it. Academic, scholarship has its own canons, and part of the canon of scholarship is transparency and accountability. That is very, very strong as part of our training as academics. We have our own rules, and we must, there are rules of what they call canonical rules. It prepares you for the future, not just to teach, it prepares you for the future. That wherever you find yourself, you must play that role where you find yourself with integrity, with transparency, and with respect, tolerance for others. So I think it is immaterial. It's just like politicians. What training do they need to go to? I mean, as a political scientist, I go through certain exams, through certain processes, and again, I'm certified that yes, you can now be a professor. But in the case of a chairman of an electoral commission, chairman of any organ, I mean, what kind of training prepares you for that, other than what you bring back from your own life experience? And your life experience as an academic is not limited to the university alone.
Okay.
So I think the whole concept of intellectual work implies integrity, responsibility, and honesty. So I think anybody who comes to that, but then when you are in a different environment, you can have a PhD and not be a good teacher. You can have a PhD and not be a good lecturer. You may not have a PhD and you can be a good teacher, you can be a good scholar. It depends on the personality of the person and how that person interprets the role he has to play. So I think, don't let us worry about this a professor or no professor. No, the point is that your life training, the totality of your life training, is what prepares you for the job that you find yourself in.
I do agree with you there, Professor. I do agree with you there. Let me also add that that personality also has to be tested And maybe that's what we're all looking forward to. Integrity, transparency, and tolerance, like you said. Let me add another one. Let's add independence. One of the biggest public concerns is whether INEC can truly act independently, free from executive, partisan, or even security agencies' interference. The past elections...
But you see, these are ambiguous terms. What does independence mean? In the specific context of electoral management bodies, independence has been defined in one of two ways. One, you remove the management of elections from the public service, so that INEC officials are not civil servants. They are not employed by, are not actually, so you create them out of the executive branch, and that was in fact what we did in 1987 when we came in, and we said, look, independence is defined for the electoral in the sense that it has the power to choose its own staff, to discipline them, and to promote them, and to give them assignments to do. And that is why, if you look at the law, the constitution, before it talks of, there are some limitations to that where they are answerable to the executive branch. But independence in this context that we are talking means that in terms of recruitment, promotion, discipline of staff, INEC is independent of the civil service, of the public service. So that is the main point.
So, sir,
but also, you must know that independence is never absolute. And as I said before, there are three aspects of this: rule making, rule application, rule adjudication. So in the whole process here, INEC has to work with that. There is an interdependence between various institutions in terms of doing the process. Then the other aspect of it, of course, is that, the most critical issue is the context in which INEC is operating. If that environment is toxic, if that environment is nasty, if that environment is unwholesome, it creates a lot of, it diminishes from the work they are trying to do. And that is the problem we have with elected management bodies in African countries, where a lot of infrastructural deficits are available, where you have government parties, ruling parties, not only in Nigeria, everywhere across the continent, even in the US and everywhere, ruling
Professor
parties
Jinadu,
want to influence the electoral process.
Well, Prof, I really wish we could stay and take a class from you on this one, because it is becoming very interesting, and you're not just limiting it to Nigeria. It goes across Africa here. But perhaps maybe on another time we can have this robust conversation. But thank you very much, Professor Jinadu, for joining us and giving us your 2 pence on the matter here tonight. Thank you, sir.